This episode of the Farbank Fly Fishing School series focuses on the utter delight and beauty that fishing a spring creek brings to the angler. For some, a spring creek provides a more technical way of fishing, a tougher prey to try and entice, and provides a great test of angling and casting skills. For others, it is the beautiful canvas that Mother Nature has painted, a place to slow down and savor the ambience and tranquility that spring creeks provide. Whatever the reason, fly fishing in spring creeks requires a new skill, a more cautious approach than regular rivers, and a different way of rigging. But before we get into the bones of this episode, just remember, you must have the necessary licenses and permissions to go fishing, and you should know all the rules and regulations of the water that you are fishing. So, with that out of the way, let's slide into this episode and see just how to fly fish a spring creek. So let's take a look at what a spring creek is. Or in the UK, you could call them chalk streams, where I'm from. I love fishing chalk streams, spring creeks, and they're kind of a similar type of river. And basically, these are rivers that evolve from the ground. There might be a spring bubbling up from underground and pushing a load of water down. There might be a water aquifer that's a little high and it just drains out and the water comes out of the ground. They're not really rain-fed so much. The water temperatures are usually fairly set. They don't fluctuate too much. They don't really change in color with a lot of rain, which is what's good about the spring creeks. So a spring creek is a special fishery to go to. You might say, well, why would you fish a spring creek? Well, one option is you live in the area of spring creeks. You may live in Hampshire in the UK, and all that's around you are chalk streams. So you're going to fish a spring creek or a chalk stream. Same with the US. You might live in an area where there's only spring creeks, and that's your local fishery. But to other people, the other reasons for fishing spring creeks is one, they're very, very technical. The waters are clear, they're filtered by the ground. As I said, rain doesn't really affect them, so the water is almost invariably clear. And that clear water presents a whole pile of challenges. Spooky fish, they can see you. Slower waters, they can hear you. So a lot of people like the challenge of spring creeks. And perhaps above everything, spring creeks are usually very, very pretty. They're beautiful rivers. They tend to flow through slower meadow-like land. The water's slower, there's less gradient. It's picturesque. There's just beautiful fisheries to be hanging around. So a lot of people just love to hang out and fish a spring creek because it's so pretty. Now, the thing about spring creeks, it does create unique fishing challenges. First of all, as I mentioned, the water's going to be clear and the fish will see you. And if they see you, they bolt. So you've got certain challenges because of the clarity of the water. You've also got slower water, and that slower water means that if you wade with a splash or a noise, or you step in firmly, or you stumble, or you make a lot of noise, those slower waters, the ripples and noise spread out more and scare your fish. That's another challenge. And perhaps one of the more complex challenges that you really don't understand until you get to the river is that spring creeks tend to be more of an alkaline-based water. That means weed beds grow profusely out of the water or underwater, and these weed beds create fluctuations in current. And generally speaking, casting across one speed of current doesn't present a set of problems. But in spring creeks, when you've got these weed beds and you've got current slow here and fast here and slow here and fast here, you have to adapt your style and your cast specifically to cope with those changes of current speeds. So really, that's what spring creeks are. That's what some of the challenges are. And really, to get into spring creeks, you probably should approach them with some more specialized gear. And we're going to take a look at what kind of gear you need in the very next chapter. Now, you don't need any particular gear to fish a spring creek, right? It'd be ludicrous to say, oh, you need a special outfit to fish a spring creek. You can just use your regular river outfit or even your lake outfit and go down and catch fish. But if you do a lot of spring creek fishing, then a couple of things to take into account which will help your day on the water. First of all, spring creeks tend to be a bit slower and a bit narrower. You're not going to need long casts. And also because of the clear nature we talked about in that earlier chapter, fish are spooky and you're going to tend to fish thinner diameter monofill and leaders and tippet material. And both of those suggest using rods that are either a bit lighter in line size or maybe a bit slower in action. For me, my go-to spring creek rod is this Trout LL from Sage. It's just a medium action rod. I don't need to cast far, so I don't need a fast action rod. But what I like about a medium action rod is I can fish some really thin tippet material and set the hook and play the fish, and there's a bit more shock absorption with that. So for me, I like something like this for fishing smaller spring creeks. And again, if you don't want to buy a particular outfit, then just go to a lighter line, right? My normal trout outfit's a 9'5" weight, but this is an 8'6" 4 weight. I don't need a long rod because the rivers tend to be a bit smaller, but above all, that 4 weight is a little bit more forgiving than the 5 weight for fishing leader and tippet. So again, I don't want to break off on light leaders when I set the hook or play a fish. So those might give you a little bit of an edge, not necessary, but just observations to understand that will benefit your day on the water. In addition to the rod, of course, you have to have a fly line, and perhaps one of the most important things about the fly lines is you don't want to spook the fish. You're not going to catch a fish if it's not there. So you see a fish rising, you cast a nice bright colored fly line, and before your line lands, the flash of the line in the air spooks the fish in that clear water. They see it. I've seen this a number of times. Before my line even lands, the fish are gone, and they've seen that line, bright line in the air. So maybe consider investing in a line that's a little bit more darker, a bit more subdued color. This is the creek line we have at Rio. Nice olive color, very subtle front end. I like that in smaller rivers. For casts up to about 25 feet, this is an absolutely ideal line, especially with that color. But for longer casts, bigger rivers, I tend to fish the Rio Gold. Again, it has that kind of subdued, more muted color front end. It's not going to spook fish in the air and casting or sitting on the water, but it has a longer head than the creek line, so it's better for slightly longer casts and wider rivers. And then on the end of that line, you've got to put your leader. Again, don't really have to have a special leader on there, but perhaps the most important thing I would recommend you follow is long leaders. Like your standard leader is probably going to be your 9-foot, 4X or 5X. That's your standard trout leader. Most people will fish that for their trout rivers. I got to say, it's going to be a problem if you just fish 9-foot leaders on spring creeks. Your fly line is only 9 feet away from the fly, and while that may sound like a long way away, you will catch a lot more fish with a longer leader. And there's a couple of options. Obviously, one is you can buy a longer leader. Here's some longer leaders we make at Rio. There's a 12-foot and a 15-foot. So you can just buy a longer leader and put one of these on instead of your 9-foot leader, and you will get better presentation, spook less fish. But if you don't particularly want to buy a special leader, then on the front of your 9-foot leader, you might add another 3 or 4 feet of your tippet material. You extend the leader. So I might take this 4X here and add on 3 or 4 foot of tippet material and make it a 12 or 13-foot leader. And again, that longer leader is really going to benefit you in terms of not scaring fish. And that's what we want to do. And as far as tippet materials go, for me, in spring creeks, I'm going to run with a couple of options. I'm going to either run with a very, very supple material. This is something we have at Rio called Supple Flex. It's the softest material we've ever made, which means that when you've got really tiny flies and micro currents, you get a lot more natural movement with the fly. I like these super supple materials with small flies, particularly small dry flies with multiple current seams. And the other material I fish a lot of is going to be a fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbons, if you don't know what fluorocarbons they are, they're a different material to regular nylons, but they have a light refraction index very, very similar to water. And what that means to the layman is if you take a piece of this and put it underwater, it almost completely disappears. So you have a little bit more advantage when you're fishing very clear water that's calm and you have these spooky trout. You don't want to spook those. In those situations, a fluorocarbon will give you a big edge. And then really, as opposed to flies, well, pick what you like. Are you a dry fly angler? Are you a nymph angler? Are you a streamer angler? You probably won't fish a spring creek with streamers. Not really the ideal thing, but you might fish your regular dry flies. You might fish soft tackles. Guilty. If I'm going to spring creek, I'm going to take my box of soft tackles. You might fish a team of nymphs. So your flies aren't particularly specialized, but when you do get to the water, study the water, see if fish are rising. Gives you an idea to fish dry flies. Take a look on the water. Oh, look, there's a blue thing floating down. Or there's a pink thing floating down, and just try and match the color of that if you don't know your Latin family names. So your flies are less important. Just make sure you have a nice selection of dry flies and nymphs and possibly soft tackles. And then perhaps, believe it or not, perhaps the most important item in your tackle bag is going to be a pair of really good polarized sunglasses. And polarization is a lens that cuts out light at a 90-degree angle. And when you put things on like this and you look in the water, it'll cut out a huge amount of glare. And that's fantastic because you can look through the water. You can see fish. You can see where fish lie. You can see where the weed beds are. You can see the depressions, and you take it off and you just can't see anything because there's a glare. So if you're doing a lot of Spring Creek or any kind of clear water fishing, make sure you have a good set of Polaroid glasses with you. And on that note, one really top tip I would suggest is also go down to your local pharmacy or chemist or whatever you want to call it, and just get some lens cleaning wipes. Keep them in your tackle bag or in your fishing vest, and just at the start of the day, just wipe your lenses down, just on the outside, right in the corners. You don't want to get in the corners, and on the inside. Believe me, you get an awful lot of smudges. Your fingers have got a little bit of grease on them. You touch your lens, or you get a bit of sun cream because you put it on your nose and you accidentally touch your lens, and that affects the vision and the ability to see through your glasses. So for me, every single morning when I fish, I clean my sunglasses like that. And in the middle of the day, if they start to get a little bit murky or get a fingerprint on it, give them another clean. So as I said, not really, you don't need specialist gear. I think if you have gear like I've mentioned and outlined here, you'll probably have a better chance of catching fish and scaring less fish. So that's a really good thing to have. But you can equally go down with your regular fly fishing outfit and have just as much fun and catch probably almost as many fish as anyone else. So here we are. We're on a beautiful Spring Creek in Montana. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's a beautiful Spring Creek and there's a lot of good fish in here. And we're here to show you how to fish a Spring Creek. But before we show you how to fish a Spring Creek, let's run through a couple of things that's going to help you catch fish. And that is, don't scare them. And that means understanding a few subtle things at the way you approach. For example, don't wear bright color clothes. Wear more subtle camouflage, more darker hued, subtler toned clothes. That's a help there. When you walk along a riverbank, bear in mind the fish are low down and you might have a silhouette against the sky. So try and never walk along a skyline. And as you're walking along a riverbank, particularly in an area where you want to fish, keep low. A low approach is much better than a high approach. Walk really slowly. Fast moves are more obvious to fish and that will spook them. So keep low, walk slowly, and avoid the skyline. And those are kind of your top tips for approaching the water. And then when you get to a nice piece of water, just watch it from a long way away. Look for rising fish. If they're rising, we're going to fish a dry fly. But if they're not rising and the pool looks really good because it looks like a good pool, they're still there. They're probably feeding on nymphs, so you're going to fish nymphs in that pool. So you study from afar, get an idea of what the pool looks like, where the fish are probably lying, what they're feeding on. And then once you've got that, you formulate your plan, you set up your outfit, your dry flies or your nymph or your hopper dropper. And now you've got to wade into position. And wading also requires certain skills on Spring Creeks. Again, the fish are very spooky in these waters. They're clear. They can see a lot. The waters are still, so noise and sound travels a long way. So the first thing when you're wading is wade really, really slowly. Don't make any splashes. Don't make any sudden noises. That'll send out ripples and waves and alert fish, particularly in slow pools like the one Hannah's fishing here. And also, when you wade, if you have the option, try and wade from below the fish upriver rather than downriver. And the reason for that is the noise and mud and anything you kick up will wash downstream in the current. So if you can approach the fish from below it and you create a noise or you create mud, it's more likely to wash away from the fish rather than towards the fish. So subtle approaches like that will get you closer to the fish, which gives you a chance for a better cast and gives you a chance for a better fish. So really, that's all there is to the Spring Creek. Just be a little bit more cautious. Remember, these are wild animals, wild creatures, and they're on red alert. They're ready to be spooked. So just approach them with an awful lot of care. And then when you've done that, well, you're in a position to make the cast. And that is what we're going to talk about in the very next chapter. There aren't many special casts you need to fish a Spring Creek. You have to cast. You've got to be a fairly good caster. Got to know your overhead cast, that's a given. You might need to know roll cast, and you might need to know a side cast because there might be overhanging trees. But the casts I think are really vital for you as a Spring Creek angler is going to be a slackline cast. And the reason for that is Spring Creeks have numerous weed beds and numerous currents, and a straight cast across numerous currents will get a lot of drag. So you need to be able to throw slack into your fly line. There's a cast called a slackline cast. You need to know that one. Another really good cast is called the reach cast. The reach cast or the reach mend, that's good for fish lying tight to the bank, tucked to the bank. When you've got to cast your fly close to the bank and you don't want your line to land and snag the bank, that's what a reach mend or reach cast is good for. And one other cast I would learn is the aerial mend. And that's a cast where you throw a mend into the line in midair. So your fly lands with a mend in it. Rather than you cast a dry fly, the dry fly lands, you lift a mend and you move or drown the dry fly. So an aerial mend is another really essential cast to know. And if you don't know those, we're not talking about them in this video, but if you go back to our previous episode, other essential river casts, you'll see exactly how to do all of those casts. So get them under your belt, learn those casts, and they'll serve you in good stead on a spring creek like this. And perhaps the only other thing I would say you do is practice your accuracy casting. Accuracy is so important. Sometimes you want to cast your fly in a little window that's 2 inches wide. Sometimes you want to cast your fly 6 inches in front of a fish. So you need to be accurate. You need good presentation, and that's going to come from the long leaders we talked about earlier on, and you're certainly going to need accuracy. So I would go out to your local playing field, aim at a few dandelions, put out a hula hoop and just practice casting like that. Because if you get your accuracy skills right, you'll increase your catch rate by 5 or 6-fold on a spring creek like this. So as I said, not many specialist casts, but there are casts that will help you out on a little river like this. And once you know those casts, well, simply you've got to go down to the river and catch some fish using some various techniques that are probably really good techniques to know for fishing spring creeks. And we're going to take a look at that in the very next chapter. So how do you fish a spring creek? Well, the first thing is with stealth. We've mentioned that time and time again in this episode. Stealth, careful, don't spook the fish. Spook the fish, you won't catch it. Other than that, it is a river, and that means you can fish it with any technique you like for fishing rivers. If you want to fish a streamer, by all means fish a streamer. You'll catch plenty of fish on streamers in a little spring creek. You can fish a nymph and indicator, you can fish soft tackles. But to me, the essence of spring creeks is the stealth, the difficulty of it. And so I like to find the slower pools. I like to look at those slow pools. I like to find a rising fish. I like to wade into a casting range and watch those fish rise. I like to try and position my dry fly so it lands just above the fish and I get this lovely drag-free drift. I want to see that head come up and eat it, slow lift set, and I want to catch a fish that way. I love that. That's, to me, the essence of spring creek fishing. If you want to make it a little bit harder, as you walk the river, especially on a sunny day, and especially on those slower pools, look for fish lying a bit deeper. They're not rising, but you can see them underwater, and they might be moving to the side or up a little bit and dropping back, and those fish are feeding underwater on nymphs. And in that situation, I love to fish a nymph. I don't fish an indicator in those situations. The water's calm. I don't want to scare the fish with a big visible indicator that lands with a plop. So I fish no indicator, little bit of a nymph, chuck it upstream, and watch for that line just to tighten. Very technical, very satisfying way of fishing. Now, if you're getting into fly fishing, you don't really want to have those technical skills, and you want something a little bit easier, you can certainly fish the nymph with an indicator, but I wouldn't put the big bobber type thing on. Too much indicator splash, too much visibility. So in those situations, I tend to go to something like this. This is called a Kahuna LT strike indicator we make at Rio. It's a tiny little thing. You break a piece off and you thread it on your leader, and it creates this tiny little indicator that lands with incredible softness. And its silhouette is tiny, so it doesn't scare fish, but it's still a great indicator. So that's another really good option. And then if you get out of those slower pools and the slower waters into pools more like Hannah's fishing here, she's fishing this little bit of a fast neck, can't see rises, you can't see the fish underwater. In those pools, the hopper drop is probably the master technique. You tie your dry fly on and you hang a little nymph or a small weighted nymph underneath that dry fly, and you watch the dry fly for it to bob under or get grabbed by a fish. So it does depend a little bit on the water. I'm not going to go into more of how you fish those techniques. If you haven't fished any of those techniques, just check back on some of our previous episodes. We have episodes on dry fly fishing and nymph fishing and even soft tackle fishing and streamer fishing. And you can check those and learn out these techniques. But for me, as I said, the spring creek, I love the magic and the beauty of the spring creek. I love the technicality of fishing for spring creek. I love those slower waters. And I hope you get the chance to get out on a spring creek and just see how wonderful it is to fish spring creeks with any of those techniques. And above all, get out there and have a little bit of fun. So there you have it, an array of new skills, subtle approaches and unique ways of rigging your equipment that will increase your chances of success when fly fishing in spring creeks. I love the relaxed beauty of such wonderful fisheries. And if you haven't fished a spring creek before, I hope this episode inspires you to do so and gives you the skills necessary to maximize your day on the water. As always, I want to end this episode with a friendly reminder to do your part in keeping the river clean and the fish healthy. Look after the environment. Leave no trace of your visit to the water and treat the fish you catch with the utmost respect. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope to see you on a spring creek one day, putting these newfound skills to great use.